We've begun there with an advert, which was a sort of suitable way to begin a conversation about stop motion, showing something which has absolutely no animation in it whatsoever. But of course, your work, like I said, spans various different mediums, and this advert, in a way, sort of brings together lots of your, should we say, trademark approaches in terms of playing with light and with music, and also particularly movement. And in this advert, we see this sort of shoulder gesture that the samurai are doing, and it makes me think of the gesturing of the dolls in Street of Crocodiles or the frantically pedaling feet in Gilgamesh, and it feels like your films have a very sort of specific movement language. So I wanted to start with the concept of movement, which maybe is the language of the animator.
Well, it's interesting that we were both trying to think back why we were working for this advertising agency academy in London, and this call came in to present this project. And when we showed up, it was a kind of Asian fusion kind of kung fu thing, and we looked at them and we just said, no, you can't have Chinese and Japanese and Hawaiians in this kind of film, that you've got to be really focused. So we said, we presented, why don't we do a homage to Kurosawa's Seven Samurai, and that he actually got the music from Yojimbo. So when Joseph just said this gesture at the end, well, it's Mifune at the end of Yojimbo does this little shrug, which was just a quote from us.
But I remember it took something like 30 takes for the old man to do that.
Crank it out. But the interesting thing was that when we presented them with the music by Sato, which is originally from Yojimbo, the team, the agency said, they were shocked, they were overwhelmed. They said, "You're on. That's great. Let's go for it." So the next thing we knew, because we wanted that the opening scene, that you feel that you're probably in Japan with these horses coming over, sheep, like that. So we flew to went to Connemara, and then we scouted out the area, and then we did casting in London here, and the only people that showed up were Chinese people and trying to pretend that they were samurai, and we just sat, and then we told the agency,
and one cook,
and one
who was Japanese.
Yes, that's right. And then we said this isn't good enough, and so they flew us to L.A. The next morning, and then where we were to cast real Japanese people. So we arrived at the place, and we saw this massive long queue of all dressed in samurai outfits with swords, waiting for the audition. So we had hundreds, and we chose 7. And they literally flew out the next day to Dublin and Connemara. And then that opening scene that you see are actually, none of the samurai could ride horses. So they were all girls dressed in samurai outfits with their own horses. That was the 7 Samurai.
And the music in that one is really interesting, and it sort of has a real dramaturgy to it in terms of the opening drums and then where it goes, and it sort of then waltzes into this other sort of scenario. And you've called music your secret scenario in the past, and it feels like often you're using music where you're not using dialogue. The music becomes a dialogue, becomes a sort of storytelling device.
It's a secret scenario for us. It really is. It's just trusting in the music, and
well, it also tells you how to montage the film. The music generates every single cut.
And you're often you're almost always starting with the music.
Always the music's on that, because all the commercials, you'll see some just after this, they were all shot in 35. So with the samurai film, was all done on 35, and so the cutting was, the music was laid, and so the cutting was done just to the music.
And you still work in that way now?
We still work
with
in
the
that
shorts,
way.
with the features. You're bringing composers on early and then establishing that soundtrack.
Yeah, we won't change.
And were there commercials? Because we're going to see. So I mean, this is a rare treat because the commercials are. I mean, if you dig deep enough on YouTube, you can find some of the Quay's commercials, but they're not something you're putting front and center when you're having retrospectives in Mexico and America. And you've called them in the past your sort of handshake with the devil.
Yeah, because I think we realized that if we spent most of the commercials that the next bit you'll see, they took 6 weeks. So it was a 3-week build, a 3-week shoot, and basically you cut it in a day or 2 days. And we figured that to spend 6 weeks out of 52 weeks to do one commercial, it paid for the freedom to do our own work in the studio. So we called it our bet with the devil, but it was a good bet.
And so that was sort of facilitating, in a way, the more independent work.
Totally.
The shorts.
Totally.
Helping pay the bills.
Yeah.
In terms of what we're going to see next, looking at this commercials reel, dates-wise, we're going back.
They were from. It's funny that after we did Street of Crocodiles, suddenly they felt that we were viable as a commercial possibility.
It's the most commercial short I've ever seen.
Yeah, and so suddenly these things sort of kept flying in. But so you worked with Honeywell. You did ICI Dulux. You did Badois. All these things would just come in, and it was good because it stretched you. You sort of said, these are interesting. I mean, we if they were interesting, we did them. If we felt they extended our palette, as it were, then we would go for it.
So they were almost a sort of testing ground to try.
Well, the other, yes, and also the other thing is that there was always the post-production side of it, where of course you had massive budgets, huge budgets. So for instance,
Also huge budgets to buy things.
Yeah.
Because in one of the commercials, the Dulux was called The World of Wood. And so our premise was that we said, World of Wood, yes, we went down to Curtin Street and we bought £5,000 worth of exotic veneers just to make that film.
we still have this.
We still have the veneers under
our
the
bed.
Well, I should say as well, we're in a sort of suitable Quay fashion. We're not moving chronologically in any sense. We're going to be moving more organically and holistically throughout the chronology of the twins' works. But I think we're sort of following a thematic thread, and we'll see where things take us. But let's now watch a rarely seen reel of commercial works from the twins, which are ranging a number of years, and I think you'll find it surprising and interesting in terms of the stylization. I think that's probably the only example of you doing computer animation in your whole career.
No, we didn't do the community in that one thing.
Including it. I mean, what's interesting looking at those is that it's sort of, there's a great sense of humor behind it, which possibly, doesn't appear so much in the shorts and the features.
It doesn't.
But there are teasers of it, but it's in the shadows. And I think watching those, and you do have a kind of wicked sense of humor. So were the commercials, was there a sense that those were sort of, they were a little more playful? You could sort of, like you say, bash them out in a few weeks and sort of have a bit of fun with those alongside the other commissions?
Well, they were really well written, and you could see that. And then you always got the voices first, so you knew right away that, okay, like the Weeds thing at the end with the Brando voice kind of thing. But I remember that Monsanto approached us like a year later and said, we're interested in doing part 2, but maybe less sympathy with the weeds.
It discouraged people from buying the weed killer.
But I mean, but like the commercial with the World of Wood, what was sort of exciting for us right away was this whole, the project was based around wood, so that everything we did, we said formally, let's just go down the route of wood.
So the rain was toothpicks, obviously. But I remember the first time when we did the toothpicks on huge pieces of glass, and when we animated it, we realized when it came back, we said the rain was going backwards. And so we simply had to do it again. But then at the end, when it came to choosing the music, we said, if it's the world of wood, then we choose woodwinds to do the music. So we told the composer, just think in terms of woodwinds, and that's what he did.
So you're sort of giving yourself these frameworks.
Yeah.
Wood all the way through.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the Baudouin one, in some ways, feels like a sort of gentle homage to Starewicz, and the sort of his anthropomorphic animals in a way, and it feels like an interesting time to sort of go back a little bit to how you got into this originally, because I know there was a sort of graphic route for you originally in Philadelphia, looking at naturalist drawings and then Polish posters, which sort of opened up this world of designers, Jan Lenica, Walser, Borowczyk, and those kind of artists. And it was later that you sort of saw the puppet animation of Jiří Trinka and Starewicz and the rest.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about how that initial route into animation evolved?
Yeah, we should know this by now. No, it was, I think it was by the chance of seeing Ladislav Starewicz's work that really...
We saw that in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
It was we could rent a 16mm print from
The public library.
and that's how we first saw Starewicz.
Was that whilst you were at the Philadelphia College of Art?
No, it was after we came back from the Royal College.
Right.
Royal College.
And so
But
those...
I just think that we felt that, well, actually, when we first got our first, when we applied to the BFI for our first film, it was going to be a puppet film, and I just think that there were no
manuals.
There
were no books
Yeah.
on how to make a puppet film in English.
But I think what we felt was that it had to be, they weren't going to give us money to make a live action film, and we felt with our graphic background, and then having seen some of the films of Starewicz and Trinka, that basically on a 4x8 table, we could create an entire universe, and no one would be looking. You know, we could fail miserably and just learn the craft of puppetry, and I think that was the impulse initially to.
Because it's interesting growing up in the States when you did. Over there, stop motion animation in particular was almost historically a visual effect. It was sort of subservient to, as wonderful as Harryhausen's work is, it was sort of, it was a secondary element of a live action film with actors. So was it sort of seeing Starewicz and Trinka, that was sort of opening the potential of stop motion as a sort of storytelling medium in its own right?
Well, you realize that suddenly the world could be at your table a size like this. And I think that was something that was not only a challenge, but also we could forsake the fact that we would be denied live action. And suddenly we said, who needs live action? The world of puppetry. These puppets are like emissaries from the beyond. And that we could, you know, it was we did a documentary on a Belgian playwright, Michel de Gelderode, and he was one who wrote many times for the puppet theater, and a puppet theater that we visited in Brussels, and it was called the Tone Marionette Theater. And he said that it was important that when you enter the cave, the cellar, that you stooped to enter into the world of puppets, and you were enchanted by their kingdom. And we took that to heart. We said that was the reason for.
And I think that, you know, being, of course we knew the Harryhausen films, but we didn't particularly like Greek legends. We didn't particularly like that kind of puppetry. And so, but we felt that what we wanted to test was just what pathologies puppets could actually hold, or in what direction could they be pushed. And that was something that we had to slowly experiment on as we did the films one by one.
And I mean, people often sort of mistakenly state that you've been influenced by Švankmajer, who actually, Jan Švankmajer, you came across his work sort of much later, but there was the Czech puppeteer Richard Teschner, who you saw, you sort of came across
Austrian.
more.
He was Austrian, but yes, we did see his
Rod puppets.
They were, but we only ever saw the book on his,
Right.
his and
So
it
the
was
image of the puppet was sort of
No, actually, we saw some 8mm films of his
at the museum
in
Vienna.
In Vienna.
Right.
And he's a man who worked with rod puppets, very elegant in this. The only way you could see it was in a vast glass mirror. And so if you go to the Theater Museum in Vienna, you can still see a reconstruction of
his actual
the
stage.
space that he worked
Yeah.
in.
Well, let's watch another clip. This is an ident you made for Kinoteka, which is the Polish film festival here in London. You've done a few idents for them. We're going to see one of them. Do you want to say anything about this one before we watch it?
Well, Polish Cultural Institute in London has been very kind to us, and they commissioned 2 of the Kinoteka logos before the festival. So each was different, but the second one is what you'll see now.
Okay, great. Let's watch this Kinoteka ident. So there we go. They were the other way around. So the Kinoteka was the second one, and the first one was a sort of an incongruous advertisement for MTV.
MTV commissioned 2 things at once. The first one was like a 15-second ident where you had to do something, but it had to come up with the letters MTV. The second one was called the art piece. Of course, that's the one we dug into. And they normally said it had to be, I don't know, 45 seconds maximum, but they gave us 1 minute 20. And it was just, you could do anything you wanted.
Carte blanche.
Carte blanche, and that's what we did. So, but I think that you know, the journey that we were making was that there was always these commissions coming out of nowhere, whilst at the same time you were pushing, you know, your own personal projects and trying to get them off the ground. So you often had to just stop and
But that was part of the discovery
Yeah.
of saying what these commissions that flew in, and you'd say, okay, what do we do? And I remember we were playing with magnets with the whole. This was still in Act 1. We did 4 of them, and we said they were all selling useless items. So this one was selling steel wool at a discounted price, and so in a way, what you discovered by playing with magnets became that film, and we just built up a scenario for it.
Corrupted advertisements.
revenge.
And I mean, one thing that's interesting to sort of draw from that and dive into is this this sort of notion that in your films it's not just human figures that are moving, but there's an animacy of space, that light flickers across walls, objects move, everything has the capacity for vibrating existence. It's not just a performative puppet, but there's a flux to the whole space, and it's
you also realize that we had to train those iron filings to do what they did.
And is that a mix of, are you shooting frame by frame and bits of live action as well?
Totally.
Frame by frame.
Single frame.
Yeah.
So you had this magnet under the floor, but as you're dragging it, you can see they're lifting up, doing cartwheels as they go across.
And you really go in with a macro lens to sort of pull out those little details.
And then one of us is, I think we have some kind of device in which, so it's constantly falling. This sort of what do you call it? The atmosphere of this rain, a kind of
sort of powdered metal.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting as well. You talked about the tabletop sort of realm. With stop motion, we build the worlds from the ground up. Nothing exists beforehand. Everything you see on screen is made. There's no sort of pointing a camera in a live action space and we sort of borrow things.
No.
Everything is constructed from the ground up. And your worlds are very specific and very detailed. So I was interested to sort of hear about how you go about making those. And like you said, they often do happen on the same stage you've used for many years. So what's the sort of process of say, getting that MTV commission and going, what's this space going to look like? Does budget say we'll have one puppet, one room, off we go?
Well, it's the case of the decor being a poetic vessel, and so the whole idea is to fill that space with poetry, and nobody expects that iron filings have a life of their own, or that we could direct them into a new life. And I think that was the challenge. I think.
Also, you knew it had to be a kind of, the money was pathetic, so you said...
Yeah, we figured it out, we worked for 29p a day on that commercial.
Yeah. And the set was, about this big, so it was like a little chamber work, so you realized that just getting those long lenses in there and that you could just work really intimately. That's sort of exciting when you can do that.
And with the Kinoteca ident, that's a more recent one where we see sort of digital technology suddenly playing a part in your visual language. And of course there's been a huge change in the way that films are made since you've been making films, going from film to digital, and you've sort of bounced around in that sphere as well, and that you were always on 35mm, and then those cameras became doorstops in the studio until Christopher Nolan rang and said, make another film on celluloid. So you've sort of gone back and forth between the two. But how has digital technology affected the sort of creative process for you in terms of practicalities of making films and the visual languages you can make on screen?
Well, that was more of a graphic.
It's definitely more graphic, but we had done. I know it should come up later when we'll talk about opera and theatre, but it was an experiment we did for an opera in Amsterdam for Louis Andriessen, and that's where we first experimented with that a kind of technique of what you saw. I don't even know how to describe it, but bringing together into one frame the final image.
It's almost filmic collage, so it's going back to the early films you did, which were coming from the graphic side, and they were sort of
very high contrast,
pieces.
black and white, and saying that also, within the context of, say, an opera house, and we were doing projections, that it had to be, crisp, truly crisp, and not sensual in the way that
tones.
in the way that Stille Nacht 1 is. Yeah, it's hardcore graphics.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned theatre, and you've spoken about Teschner and the tone marionette theatre, but it's almost hard to put your finger on in terms of a description. But there is a theatricality to your work that almost existed pre you working in theatre and opera, and it's not necessarily theatrical in a sort of proscenium sense, although in the comb you do use framing devices and the proscenium, but it's more to do with perhaps a fluidity of space and a non-literal representation on screen, and that you're almost using suggestion more than, say, stop motion feature films that we're used to sort of seeing that are aimed more at a family audience. So was there a sort of theatrical language that was breathing in terms of that suggestive nature early on?
I think it was
Richard.
well, no, but I mean, I think that we did an early documentary film with Keith, our producer, which was based on around the whole story of Punch and Judy. And the one aspect that it was like a 40 or 50-minute documentary, but at the end there was an opera by Harrison Birdwhistle called Punch and Judy, and it took place in a kind of very theatrical setting. And I remember that we found our research, some beautiful old Baroque theaters where you saw how the stage worked with the traveling flats and how ingenious they were. And I think that's the first time that the notion of theater really struck us very.
It was cinematized theatre.
Yeah, and yes, so we wanted to then cinematize it.
To take it somewhere else.
Somewhere else, and not shoot it straight on like.
No, in fact, when one of the operas that we did with Richard Jones was the
Love for Three
Oranges. When the BBC came to film it, the director came up to us and said, "I've got 7 cameras all over the place looking down on this." And we said, "All you need is one camera looking straight down the barrel." And at the end, first he said, no, this is the way we do it. At the end, he came up to us and said, "You're right."
So the next clip we're going to watch is sort of symbolic of almost a subgenre of your work, which is documentaries and museums coming together. And it's interesting because it mixes this blend of history and collections and this sort of pathology of these spaces that collect all these old items. And we'll look at a clip from Through the Weeping Glass. But this was a sort of a documentary piece that you made back in the States for the Mutter Museum. But I'm wondering how one gets commissioned by the Philadelphia College of Physicians to make an experimental animated film about their collection.
No, we did an exhibition in Philadelphia at our old college, and
Of the decors. Of our decors.
of our
The
puppet-
dormitorium,
the dormitorium, our puppet decors, and Robert, the guy who ran the Mutter Museum, suddenly was there, and he said, "How about we make a film together?" And then he found the money, and we did a recce of the, because when we were students at the Philadelphia College of Art, we would do drawing classes at the Mutter Museum, and it was the dingiest, decrepit museum that we'd ever seen, really sort of disturbing. One of the first things you saw when you walked in was the woman who turned into soap. It was a good start. And then after, when that was, in the late 60s, and then when we did this exhibition I think it was 2005, he then said, come see the museum, and we went over, and it had been completely restored. It was sparkling clean, and it was very impressive. And he said, you could, if we get the grant, you have complete access to all of the archives, everything that's not even on view.
They'll hand the keys over and...
He did, basically. He just said, it's your call. But maybe we should show.
Yeah, let's watch the clip and then we
clip
can
first.
talk more about it. So this is Through the Weeping Glass. So, I mean, we should say the full title is Through the Weeping Glass on the Consolations of Life Everlasting, Limbos and After Breezes in the Mutter Museum. And you like a colon in a title. It's almost like the titles have footnotes to them sometimes.
Yeah.
But this is sort of, I mean, you've done also the Phantom Museum back in 2003 and then Inventorium of Traces in 2009. And what's the sort of appeal of going into a museum space, a collection of items, and is it that sort of, you know, behind the scenes access that you sort of you can get under the skin and bring this ephemera to life in an unusual way?
Well, with the Mutter Museum, it was to discover the inconceivable of not only
Medical conditions.
the medical conditions, but babies brought into this life in the most dire circumstances and contained in jars, and that the people who come to the Mutter Museum can actually observe these with such.
Well, it was like when we went there, it's like a vast open cemetery of these anonymous figures. But the interesting thing that for us was when we found out that we were there for a week working, and suddenly we heard that there was going to be a wedding. We thought, like, a wedding at the Mutter Museum? People are crazy. And it's true. They just hire, and it's just a natural event. So I think what we connected right away was that when we knew about the vows, that we were going to start with a one-take camera movement, follow the wedding, and then move deep into the vaults, as it were, of the Mutter Museum, and then to move on to Chang and Eng. And then we also realized when the voiceover says that they were 63, and we were 63 when we made the film, so we couldn't miss that deeper connection. But it's part of this collection of pathologies that are deeply moving, and it was like the one that we particularly centered on was a young man called Harry Eastlack, who, as a child, ran and bumped his hip on the side of a table, and then there was this massive kind of that the bone just started to foment,
yeah.
and very slowly took over his whole body, in which by the end he was only his lips could move. And he's one of the main figures at the Mutter Museum. And then his sister used to come visit this skeleton in this case. So these were things that we picked up on and elaborated on. And so again, it was this idea of...
It's what you can't do with puppets.
Yeah.
Because it presents itself as an alternative reality.
I mean, they're
capture.
They're found objects, and they're more than found objects, but you discover them, and that was our way of. I mean, you have to see the whole film. It's 25 minutes or something,
But the found objects is something that sort of threads through a lot of the work.
Yeah.
In that here you're sort of dealing with them almost, you know, behind closed doors, but the found object and this idea of the chance encounter is a really important thing for the way that you make work, and you're often traveling and perusing markets and finding things. So it's you almost have your own museum which is sort of a vocabulary, like you said about the wooden veneers.
Yeah.
You're collecting and you're hoarding, and then those things sort of end up in the films. And is there a provocation that comes from the film that something comes in and you go, okay, let's go out and find something, or is there a vocabulary of ephemera in the studio that you'll sort of pull from? How does that work in terms of their
Well,
appearing?
the thing with, say, either the Mutter Museum or any of the documentaries is that they present a situation where you come in where you don't have access to say, we're going to animate this or that. We can, under circumstances, see something that can be animated. But in this sense, the Mutter, it was all there. You just had to apprehend it, and in the ghastliness of what was being presented.
I mean, I think in the documentaries that we've done, like the Phantom Museum, which was based on the Wellcome Institute, and it was this eccentric man, Mr. Henry Wellcome, who would collect like 3,000 forceps, or it was an endless collection. And so we went out to the old post office building in Olympia, and the Wellcome had, I think, the first floor and the bottom floor. We just roamed through it, and they just said, pick out some things that you'd like to do. So I think you have to adjust yourself to each individual space and try to let it tell you some of its story without imposing, it's going to be this or it's going to be that. It has to. So it was the same with the Mutter Museum. We spent a lot of time perusing the objects, the space, the library that they had, a massive, fantastic library. So it was just, and then we slowly weaved together the story.
You're almost curating a narrative then from the highlights that you've seen. And you do have books in that film as well, don't you? There's
quite a few. I mean, there are like original pop-up books from the 16th century. Extraordinary. Mezzotints and...
and what's the process like working with a museum? I mean, I know there is a behind-the-scenes film with this piece where you sort of see all the museum attendants in their white gloves, and you're daintily having to sort of operate around these elements. Is that? I mean, presumably that's sort of very different to the intimacy of being in the studio, where you can work in your own way. You have to sort of interact with teams of people.
But you could suddenly adjust. You just realize you had to use these gloves, because usually when we animate the puppets, it's just our hand.
Direct.
That sense of transmission of flesh against the puppet, wood or whatever. But in not only the Mutter but the Phantom Museum, they would say, listen, we've got this. They brought in a wooden coffin. As we were leaving the post office, we saw this cart coming in with this beautiful box. We said, what's in there? And they opened it up, and there was this figure that was made of wood, that every part of the body could be removed, and at the very end there was a little baby on a piece of string, so that in the end we could just hold that up, and then we put it back in, and everything reversed back, everything closed down, the tissue paper, and the lid came back down. So it was opening it and ending it at the same time, and all through animation.
So we mentioned music a little bit, and how important music has been in the films. And you, in the early days, you'd worked with music by Stravinsky and Janacek, and then you'd had, you've even had music by Zdeněk Liška, who had scored Karel Zeman films and Švankmajer's films, and then you've worked with Leszek Jankowski and more recently Timothy Nelson as sort of regular collaborators in the music. And the next thing we're going to watch is In Absentia, which is a sort of particular commission in a way that came from the BBC, which was musically oriented.
Well, in this one, the BBC commissioned 4 composers to write the music first, then they brought on the directors. So they asked, which is usually the opposite that most people work in film.
Perfect for the two of you.
Yeah, it was perfect for us. We've always worked that way. But so they had Louis Andriessen, and he was given Hal Hartley. Nick Roeg was given Portishead. John Tavener had Werner Herzog. And then we were told that for Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, they'd asked 13 people, and they all rejected it. And it came to us, and we said, happily, we'll do it. So,
let's run the clip then of In Absentia. This is from 2000.
talk about the light too. Yeah.
So what did the process look like of approaching that? Because often in your films, you're sort of drawing from literary references, and you're almost pulling and translating that into the visual medium. And starting with the music, did you sort of pour a glass of wine, get the notebook out, and listen to the whole thing? What was the way into?
It was impossible to actually really listen to the score and plot it.
The whole, yeah.
This is far too intense.
Yeah, so
You could listen to 5 seconds a day.
What we had seen, because of course the BBC wanted a little scenario from us, and we said, I think we wrote just a paragraph on the front page, that we'd seen an exhibition at the Hayward Gallery called Beyond Reason, and in it there was there were four
drawings.
Four drawings.
Four letters.
4 letters by this woman
Emma Hauck.
called Emma Hauck. And in it, they were just,
Letters to her husband.
yeah, and she just wrote again and again this gray field of you couldn't read anything. And then at the bottom it said,
Well, it just said, "Darling, come."
come.
And she wrote it something like 600 times. So it was just grey.
It was a gray, field.
It was a grave.
And what we found out that, I don't know how, somehow we intuited that the letters never reached the husband, but we didn't know that. So in the film, if you see the entire film, you'll see how we solve that.
The posting of the letters.
Yeah, but when we had this, we intuited that we needed because of her psychosis, that we needed a kind of something from the light, and what we did was you can see that the quality of the light is just pulsing, and that's because you can blame it on your English weather. That we had our studio in Southwark, so we had these windows that allowed for the sun to rise in the east, and so at 4 a.m. we had the camera set up, and we had it on time lapse, and we would just watch the light come, slowly build and come into the room, and we had a miniature set established for some of the scenes.
And the mirrors.
And we had mirrors all over the floor, but depending as the sun moved from 4 a.m. to 11, it came in through another window. So we had slots in the floor where we had these mirrors that we could make use of the sun before noontime. And then we'd stop, and then we wouldn't do any more animation for the day. But of course, what happened was that suddenly all these clouds would move in front of the sun, and you get all this
Fluctuations. Yeah.
But at first we thought it was a total disaster. But the minute you synced it up with Stockhausen's music, it was electric.
Comes to
And we
life.
found the electricity in his music.
Yeah.
So that was benevolence. That was.
So there's a visual
discovery.
metaphor kind of through
Total,
the electronic
total.
music.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And it's true of many of your projects that you almost have like a sort of a reference that's it feels like a key into the piece. Like in rehearsals, you had this Fragonard painting, and I know there's other examples where there's an image or something. And do they sort of occur at the beginning of the process, or is it a postcard that's in the studio that maybe is in the corner of the eye already, and you go, let's sort of slip this in, and it's often not necessary. I mean, here it's more obvious because Emma Hauck's writing is sort of quite present
Yes.
in the device, but
Yes.
sometimes the audience might never know that there's this sort of painterly reference in there. But
I think it's because the projects, you can spend a year on a project. So, of course, there's always this element that it's evolving as you're doing it, that you're always allowing for more things to enter into the
Equation.
the equation. And I think that that's something that intentionally that we always write a minimal script and hope to get the money, and as soon as we get the money, we throw the script out. Not out of being cavalier, but because we know that as we start to build the sets and start to live with the puppets, the objects, or whatever it is, that it's going to evolve, and that you're going to discover the film. It's not going to be a gangster film. It's not going to be this or that, but we're going to discover what the film wants to be, that's evolving out of its own makeup. And that's, so I think all these overlappings, for instance, when you say that there was the, who was the guy?
The Fragonard.
Fragonard.
Yeah.
We started off with a famous engraving that he did, which was called The Bolt, and you see a man, well, it's ambiguous. You're not sure if he's closing the bolt, and she's there like stopping him. But then we discovered that his cousin was the famous anatomist, another Fragonard. So then we started to layer it with this other element of Fragonard, and that's how I think you enriched the fabric of the project.
And I think, all of your works really act as that in a way where they're sort of an entry point into a whole bibliothèque of references and subtext, so you can discover through your films, I suppose, as you did with this sort of exhibition of Polish posters back in Philadelphia, there was a gateway then into further research and names and artists that sort of take you off on all these footnotes and trails.
Well, I mean, when we've talked about this before, about when the day we entered the Philadelphia College of Art as 18-year-old kids, there was a Polish exhibition of classic Polish posters from the 1960s. And so what was really impressive is that there was this painterly, calligraphic quality to the posters, but you'd see, unlike posters in America at that time, all you'd see would be House of the Dead, Dostoevsky, Janacek, Theater, Wilki. That's all you got. That's the only information you got. And so, of course, at that time, we didn't know Dostoevsky, we didn't know Janacek. And so it presented, all these posters presented, they were either for theater pieces or opera or film. So it presented all these constellations that opened up. So we got to learn about the music of Janacek just by doing our research. And we owe a lot to that exhibition.
Well, that's also when reading about these posters in one of the German graphic design magazines, the description said Kafkaesque, and of course in our total naivete, we went to the librarian and said, "What is Kafkaesque?" And he said, "Look it up in the dictionary." So we opened the dictionary. Of course, it didn't exist. So we thought this was perfect.
So the next clip we're going to watch is probably the shortest title in your filmography, but Maska, which is from 2010. It's possibly one of your most narratively accessible films, you could say, because there's a sort of a voiceover in the piece which sort of guides us through. This was a sort of collaboration with Poland.
Again, it was commissioned by the Polish Cultural Institute because they wanted to do an exhibition on Stanisław Lem.
For the centenary.
Yeah, and in the end, it never happened, but the film happened. The guys, they said, please choose one of the 10 robot stories by Stanisław Lem. So we read all 10, and we didn't think they weren't very interesting for us. But this American edition that we had 2 further stories, and one of them was Maska. So that's when we chose, and they accepted it.
You slipped under the rug with the film.
Yeah.
Well, let's run the clip of Maska. I wanted to use this as a way of sort of talking about the puppet in particular in your films, because there's possibly a misconception that people go, oh, the Quay Brothers, they use dolls in the works, but actually when you look at the body of films, the way you use puppets is sort of vastly different from film to film, and there you have sort of carved figures which are more similar to the Czech marionettes or the Belgian marionettes, these sort of interloper figures, and you have homunculi. You have used porcelain dolls, but there's a range to the puppet, and often that's sort of deriving from objects that you're sort of finding and working into the piece. But what does the puppet mean to you as a vessel in animated film?
Well, I think it's like Timothy said earlier. I think that ultimately they're sort of emissaries from the beyond, and you want them there's this otherness that they bring to, and they're there to disturb. And so, for instance, in Maske here, essentially the story is that the king sends this beautiful duenna to seduce the man who's basically the heretic, and of course the duenna holds within her this machine-like creature who is a killer, sent to kill the heretic. And I know, for instance, that when we made a drawing for this creature, and it was the Polish contribution to do the armatures. And when it came back, it was so beautiful. We kind of said, we can't really dress it. You have to keep it very pure, all that steel and that glistening quality. So, in a sense, we just used it as a found object and just dressed it a little bit, and of course made it feel more like our favorite animal, the praying mantis,
Right.
and famous insect, I should say.
And also there's a hint of the science fiction through the joints and the metallic sort of
exactly.
quality to it.
Well, also you mix it with Penderecki, and you get another, which is a kind. You could almost say it's science fiction music, although he never thought of it as that.
Yeah. And this was one of several collaborations with the late Christoph Penderecki,
yeah.
who'd done scores for Wojciech Haas, originally,
And he also originally wrote for puppet films.
right.
Along with, so we always think of famous composers, and Manuel de Falla wrote for puppets, Karl Orff wrote for puppets.
Well, Schnittke. And even Arvo Pärt wrote 60 film scores. We just don't know them.
Right. So in the interest of time, I think let's move on. And on this kind of subject of music, the next clip, Metamorphosis, this is a slightly different project in that it was a commission for a sort of live event, which is similar to the stage work you've done, but a little different in that it was sort of musically led. Again, do you want to talk about this? It came about in France.
Mikhail Rudi, the pianist, said, let's do Kafka's The Metamorphosis, and we'll do it live. And obviously he'll play the piano. We just do the work. But we only had a couple of months to prepare it, and so it was a mixture of. We used live action, one rod puppet for the insect, and the.
Well, we were so desperate, we used ourselves as the actors.
Yeah, but we highly stylized it, so we had we enlarged the head, so it's quite grotesque, but.
And you're sort of pulling the image in a way, like as you do in absentia, you're sort of distorting the images and playing with.
Yeah, it's very stylized, very theatrical, but. It was a great way to work fast, and yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's watch this clip from the Metamorphosis, which was from 2012, for this live performance with the pianist Mikhail Rudi.
But it's not. It's with a new music by Timothy Nelson, because we couldn't.
Because Mikhail Rudi wasn't here.
I won't ask who was playing the wife. And in this piece, you can see an interesting sort of mix of media. There's this sort of mask, there's live action, there's animation. It's all sort of coming together, because in some of the other works, in the Comb and in Absentia, you sort of intentionally sort of separate the live action space and the animated space, and here there's then a collaging of these different mediums sitting together. And I'm interested to know about the appeal of sort of putting those different languages next to each other in a film like that.
Well, I think that we knew that we couldn't build live action sets, so they're basically just our miniature puppet decors, but
But each of the characters is just simply matted in.
Shot against black.
Shot
just purely
separately
against black.
and just joined, much like silent cinema used to do. So it's obeying silent cinema laws.
And I suppose the limitations of the studio, in a sense,
Aye.
create, in a way, what becomes the unique aspect of the film, that you have this, meter, however big it is, 8 by 8 meter space, or even smaller in the old studio, and within this space. And it's something that is sort of fascinating with your works, that you take us to post-war Poland and Mediterranean farmlands and South American sort of boiling hot landscapes, but it's all done within the confines of this gloomy space in London. But it's the magic of stop motion, in a way, that, like you said, the potential of the tabletop space, even when you're mixing in, you're building little live action sets in the corner, the studio is this sort of facilitator of these incredible worlds that take us everywhere.
Well, it's great that in the circumstances of a tabletop, that you don't need a wall behind to prove that we are in a certain space, a decor. That space can become infinite, and so in a way you abolish space, and I think that's the most challenging thing.
Take the hard edges out.
Take the hard edges out.
And that's almost maybe going back to that sort of theatricalization, that often your worlds drift into the shadows, and there aren't those sort of hard edges. We enter your spaces and they feel like they have existed beforehand, and they will exist long after the film, and there's a sort of poetic blurring of the edges of the space that let it live and breathe, let it live on.
Yes.
But the studio is important as a sort of alchemist's workshop, in a way, and
it's like we always say, it's this 4 by 8 space is a laboratory, so there's the chance to experiment and try things out,
and you're there every day. It's where you work, it's where you have meetings, it's where the puppets are made.
The transition from sitting at the table, is 5 paces, and you're at the animation table. So it's important that it's that close, and that it's.
But we always said that we wanted the cafe to be here, and then to walk 5 paces to the animation table. So you're between two worlds, where you talk, where you have special wines or something, and then you're back into the animation world.
In the shroud.
And the hands are liquidated. I mean, liquefied to anoint.
Bring a new energy to the puppets.
To the puppets.
And the books are on hand.
Yeah.
The library's right there beside us. So, and it's every day at lunch. It's like symbolically, it's a bottle of wine and notepaper, and just advancing where you've gotten that day, or what potentials there are, or is it?
Well, unlike, say, Hollywood with the big animation constructs, that they have 30 animators, and each one is doing a special sequence. And if one of them said to the director, "I've got this great idea," the director would say, "No, you don't. You don't have a chance. You just do what you're supposed to do." But it's great, because for us, we can stop at any point and say, we have to build another set, and so we will. Yeah.
You can follow
Just
a
to accommodate.
tangent, and bring it back into.
And I think
the world.
it's very important that, of course, making mistakes, or that that there is a mistake, and that you say you follow that because it opens up a possibility, and then it bends the narrative journey that you didn't foresee, and that's always. I think that's why that's why the script. It's not. You get rid of it.
It's too constrained.
It's too constraining. So.
And no one really knows what the original intention was anyway, so actually the accidents take you, if you commit to the mistake, it's going to take you somewhere else that's sort of...
better.
Yeah. So I want to come back to the sort of the meta of it, but the final clip we're going to look at is from The Street of Crocodiles, which we touched on briefly. This is from 1986, which within the sort of history of stop motion was a seminal piece which has gone on to inspire many stop motion animators and directors over the years, and has been praised by directors like Peter Greenaway and Terry Gilliam and Christopher Nolan. So let's look at this. But I think this is a really good example of what we were talking about in terms of the tabletop world, which draws you in, and this theatricality of space, and a very sort of specific realm where you can get lost in a suggestion of a geographical realm. Yeah. So, Street of Crocodiles. It's incredible to me that you've had such a sort of prolific career in terms of the body of work and the amount of projects that you've done, and how much you can make in such a short space of time. And there'll be sort of periods where I'll check back in and suddenly see you've done 3 new short films in the space of a few months, and the only explanation I can ever find is that there's 2 of you. There's one vision, but there's 2 sets of hands. But like you were saying, Timothy, in America, there are hordes of people who do all of these things, especially in a feature film. You'll have puppet makers and prop makers and set builders and storyboarders, and the 2 of you do everything within the... I know it's different with the live action work, it's more collaborative, but with the puppet films, you're making the armatures, you're making the puppets, you're designing everything, you're constructing that from scratch, and this unique skill set that you evolved of calligraphy and drawing and design all comes together. But it would be interesting to kind of hear as a final question before we open up to audiences, just about that relationship between your skill set and how that sort of how that goes into the métier of stop motion, that hands-on approach.
Well, like animation itself, it was very slow. So it deals a lot with patience and discovery, and then I think that's something that we both of us can identify with, and we don't have to look to each other and say, am I doing the right thing? Mm-hmm. We are. But it's with a subtlety of just discovery each day.
And do you feel like you like to work at a pace? Does it feel like you sort of get in and it just flows, or is it okay? We'll do this, and then we'll kind of go on to this next idea. Things are bubbling up, and you're sort of following a way through, or is there a meditative?
The thing is, nothing ever bubbles up. It's just very slow, and suddenly you say, the most important thing is once you've finished with the decors and the puppets, and then you place them in position, and then the lights come on. Light comes on, and then the light then redefines and completely defines the situation. Plus, you realize that you have the music just off screen, on the Steam Deck or whatever, and that's when the magic really starts to occur.
And if you get lost, the music is always there to return to as a guide.
And and it's true that if it doesn't quite fit the music, we'll do a second take. But you're very careful, because animation, like live action, the few films we've done in live action, it's very easy to say, let's do a second take. And in fact, let's do a 3rd and 4th take. Animation, you don't think like that. You say, fuck it. Get it right.
But, for instance, when we were doing Crocodiles, I remember there was so much glass in the set that at one point, we suddenly realized there was this agitation in one of the...
Because we were naked.
Well, also because it was stinking hot, so we didn't have any shirts on. So you see this
Pale skin is dancing around.
vibrating in one of the glass things. We're saying, we look, we keep looking at it, and we suddenly realize we've got a duck every time we go to shoot it. So we figured we'd spend 2 months ducking to get a shot right.
Crouched on the floor.
Yeah, so...
The devotional state of the puppet animator.
Exactly.
I think we still feel like we're 22 years old. So it's the same. Same anticipation.
Yeah. I think but each project you basically try to say, let's go in this direction and let's push a little bit harder, or experience starts to help out. Your skill at animating gets better. But every project is brand new. It's always tabula rasa. It's a clean slate. You start all over again, and you create the world from nothing, and that's a great pleasure. It's easy, isn't it?
Mubi.
It's almost too easy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, between streaming or just said movie, or there's so many things you can easily find access, and plus the internet with research. But we still have a great library of books that we pursue, and I think there's that tactility of opening up a volume that it won't leave us.
How long have you been playing with dolls for?
I mean, we made our first puppet film at the age of 32, so we arrived very late.
We played baseball, basketball, football. We weren't thinking about animation until 32.
But I mean, in a sense, the graphic formation that we had with drawing and things, and it's like Paul Klee said, it's taking a line for a walk. And that's the next step between graphics and animation. So we did several cutout animation films. But I think it was moving into the third dimension that was a big leap for us, and a desirable one. I think you're quite focused when the theme comes up, or the film, or the commission. There's very clear parameters. You can't just make anything willy-nilly. It would be pointless. So you might make a few sketches, but we work out a general drift that we're interested in, and we maybe will have images that we'll lay down, put up on the wall or something like that to say, let's move it slightly in this direction. So it's about discovery. No hard, fast, I don't think we've ever known from the start how it was going to end. Well, I think, in a sense, when the films that we make are, you could say very much that it's very influenced by the ballet, because in a sense, what ballet presents is non-verbal. It uses decors, light, movement, gesture. So all these things are precisely what we go for also, the same kind of, there are some dialogue or voiceovers, but not always. But dance is very important, and you know, we've done 3 dance films. We didn't have time to show them, one of them or anything. So,
But it's almost like that language of dance was relevant for the puppet animation, because it's sort of viewing your films. I feel like you can get the most out of it going into it as if you were watching an opera or a dance piece. That
exactly.
It's, like we were saying, it's interpretive, it's non-literal, it's some of it's music-led. You're going into a sort of artistic language which is different to, say, what Artman or Leica are doing. It's a more...
I mean, the thing with, for us to go to like Sadler's Wells, is that you've got a proscenium, but we don't so much deal with proscenium. We deal with the choreography of internal rhythms, close-ups, medium shots, all that. So, and when you combine it with the music, it is a kind of choreography of movement.
Movement, editing, cuts, yeah.
It is a montage of movement.
I like that, montage of movement. So we're going to leave it there. I'm going to thank the Quay Brothers very deeply for joining us tonight. So a little montage of movement for you. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you to the twins for their time this evening.